Truth be told, we are no strangers to trash here on Earth. It's everywhere. On the land, in our oceans, and even in the very air we breathe is polluted. In more recent history, human activity has also created junk in outer space. Since the 1950s, we've launched thousands of rockets and satellites into orbit. Many of them are defunct, but still there. And this could pose a threat to planet Earth. So first, exactly is space junk, and just how much is there? Our space age began in earnest in the 1950s, and since then, we've been creating a bit of a mess up there. Space junk and debris is any bits and pieces of machinery that have been left in the space as a result of human activity. This includes both big and small objects. The big objects could be satellites that have outlived their usefulness or those that didn't work at all. The smallest of these objects could be pieces of debris or even just tiny flecks of paint that came off a rocket. There are close to 2,000 satellites that are orbiting our planet at any given moment, but there is even more that are just floating around doing nothing. 3,000 of them to be exact. So more junk satellites than actual functional ones. It gets worse. There are some 34,000 pieces of known space junk that are bigger than 10 centimeters in size, and millions of smaller pieces. But even these small pieces can cause considerable damage if they collide with something. These collisions could cost us millions of dollars in terms of the damage caused to satellites and spacecrafts. Just recently, the $10 billion James Webb Space Telescope suffered irreparable damage because of tiny micrometeoroids colliding with it. But more on that later. But how does space junk get there in the first place? Since the 1950s, we've launched thousands of rockets and even more satellites into space, and let's face it, all space junk is the result of humans launching objects into space. And it stays there until it falls back into the Earth's atmosphere. Some of the objects that are in the lower orbits around the Earth return back to our atmosphere fairly quickly, which is about a few years, but most of them burn up and don't actually land on the ground. But we can't help but think that burning bits and pieces will still pollute our atmosphere. But those objects in orbit higher than 36,000 kilometers may continue to go around the Earth for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and this is exactly where most of our communication and weather satellites are in geostationary orbits. Space junk can also be created because of collisions. Two satellites may crash into each other and create thousands of pieces of debris. This is rare, but it does happen when countries will blow up their own satellites. This again creates even more pieces of debris that could be potentially dangerous. In the past, the United States, China, and India have blown up their own satellites. And can space junk fall to the Earth? The quick answer is yes. As we've already established, on an average about 200 to 400 objects enter the Earth's atmosphere annually. And these are just the objects that are tracked. This means that there's at least one piece of space junk falling to Earth every other day. But thankfully, we rarely are affected by things falling from outer space. But this has more to do with numbers and probability than anything else. Many of the objects burn up in the atmosphere before making any kind of impact. Then there's the fact that human populations are concentrated in a small percentage of the Earth's surface area. And let's not forget that 70% of our planet is ocean. So it is unlikely that we'll actually see space junk land in a major city, contrary to what Hollywood would have us believe. But does space junk pose any other risks? To be honest, the risks posed by space junk to humans and the planet are fairly minimal. However, it does pose a risk to other satellites in orbit. Basically, satellites have to move out of their way to protect themselves from being hit. Every year, hundreds of collision avoidance maneuvers are performed. This includes the International Space Station, where astronauts actually live. Collisions are rare, though. The last collision was in March 2021 when a Chinese satellite broke up. Before that, there was a collision in 2009, so there seems to be minimal danger posed by space junk. But here's the thing, we keep putting more and more things in space, and while it seems to be okay for now, this might not hold true in the future. A few companies are planning new groups of satellites called mega constellations. These will beam the internet down to Earth. Thousands of satellites will be put into space to achieve global satellite internet coverage. If successful, they could add another 50 30,000 satellites in orbit. This also means that many more collision avoidance maneuvers will have to be made too, creating even more space junk. And now let's look at some other news from the final frontier. The $10 billion James Webb Space Telescope has been permanently damaged. Yep, that's the one that just gave us fabulous images of galaxies far, far away, and now scientists at NASA are saying that parts of it have been damaged beyond repair. Toward the end of May 2022, one of the mirrors of the James Webb Space Telescope was hit by 19 micrometeoroids. These are tiny meteoroids, or small particles of rock that usually weigh less than 1 gram. Such collisions with micrometeoroids are actually very common. The US Space Surveillance Network actually tracks more than 23,000 pieces of debris that are big enough to cause damage to spacecraft, but what threw them off is that one of these pieces of debris was much bigger than they had expected. The bigger piece caused considerable damage, but each of the 19 pieces had an effect. They caused damage in the wave front of one of the mirror segments. This was noted during regular sensing of the wavefront. NASA termed it an unavoidable chance event. The event, they hope, is an opportunity for them to learn more about how the dust particles in our solar system work and how they could affect spacecraft in the future. Meanwhile, China could shift to a fully reusable Super Heavy launcher for its future projects. Launch vehicle producers in China seem to be working on designing a reusable version of the Long March 9 Super Heavy lift rocket that will be needed for its future projects. The emergence of these new plans for new reusable methane liquid oxygen launch vehicles suggests that China is looking to make big changes to its space transportation plans in the future. These reusable launch vehicles are expected to be ready by 2035. In 2021, the Chinese government gave approval for the development of a super heavy lift launcher called the Long March 9. This expendable launcher is planned to be operational by the year 2030. This would be in time to facilitate the International Lunar Research Station by China and Russia. This new design for a reusable two-stage launcher was presented in a recent public lecture by the chief designer of the Long March rocket series, Long Laheo. This is a dramatic shift from the expendable model of the Long March 9 and a version with a reusable first stage that was shared last year. The use of methane liquid oxygen offers advantages in terms of performance and reusability. The concept follows in the footsteps of SpaceX, Blue Origin, and United Launch Alliance in switching to methane liquid oxygen as fuel. And lastly, another Mars landing mission is in the works. Two space startup companies are behind the latest plans for a Mars landing mission. The project is a collaboration between Relativity Space and Impulse Space. What's interesting is that both companies are yet to hold a space mission to their name. They do have very solid plans for doing so in 2024, though. Relativity Space is a launch vehicle startup, and Impulse Space is an in-space transportation company. The Mars lander will be built by Impulse. It will also be responsible for the cruise stage and the entry capsule. Meanwhile, Relativity will be launching the lander into space on a reusable rocket called Terran R. The rocket itself is under development at this stage. The companies did not give away too many technical details about the design of the spacecraft, but there is an illustration on the Impulse Space website. The lander is encased in a capsule with a cruise stage attached to manage operations as it travels for more than 6 months from planet Earth to Mars. Once it reaches Mars, the cruise stage will detach itself, and a heat shield will slow down its speed as it enters the atmosphere of Mars. And the heat shield will also attach itself, and parachutes and thrusters will be used for the final soft landing. Looks like big things are afoot for the future of humans in space, and it all sounds very, very exciting. That's a wrap for this video. Do you think that space junk presents a danger to us on Earth? And should we be spending money on cleaning up space junk? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.